I'd like to show you some more traditional and maybe not so traditional holiday gift plant ideas. Now, one of the ones that's really not seen that much but starting to show up in the industry is bromeliads, at least as far as the holiday time. Now, bromeliad is actually a tropical plant that really was found in a lot of the tropics, so that tells you that it's not very cold hardy. But it's an epiphyte, and what that tells us is some of the genera or species of them actually do not have roots that attach in the soil. They maybe are attached to a plant or a piece of wood or a stem, and they're not feeding on it like a parasite, but instead they're absorbing their nutrients and moisture from the air. And we have some of those smaller type species hanging up here in the greenhouse. Now, this particular one of bromeliads is also potted in the soil. So you can see there's a smaller one in a pot, and it gets a little bit of its nutrients from the soil as well as absorbing it from the air too, as far as nutrients and moisture. Now, with the bromeliad, really what we're looking at that is the most colorful part is not the flower. This is the bracts or the leaves that are turning that color, similar to what a poinsettia does. The flower is very inconspicuous and actually right in the center there, and they're not even blooming yet. But there's a natural practice or a gas that's released by the plant, kind of like a pineapple would be, and they're in the same family as a matter of fact, that triggers this bloom spike to come up and turn different colors depending on the cultivar. Now, once the parent plant has bloomed, that's all it's going to do. Then you would need to propagate it to get more to bloom for the next year. You can see here's a yellow one that's very unusual. You'll find them in variegated colors, pinkish colors, a whiter color, and some of them will even have spines on the leaves and make it a little bit rough, so you got to be careful in handling them. But very attractive color that would fit in nicely during the holiday season. Now, the way you would propagate them after they're bloomed is what is called pups, and you can see on this plant here some of the side shoots or pups that come off to the side, and you could take this one that's already drying up, it's been there quite a while, and just cut it off, stick it in the soil, and get it to root again. Now, because these like high humidity, you need to water the soil, but let it dry out a little bit in between. But also when you're watering, pour water down in the center of the vase-like or pitcher-like opening at the top, and that holds moisture in there. And then you can dilute a little bit of fertilizer and put in there too, because they're pretty heavy feeders for that particular type of plant. So these are bromeliads, lots of choices out there, and a very interesting tropical type plant. Now, on the opposite side of the scale is one that's known as holiday cactus. Used to we would refer to them as Christmas or Thanksgiving cactus, and we're getting away from that now because most people thought that meant the time of year that they would bloom. Well, really it's conditions, growing conditions, that triggers that instead. You can see they're very colorful flowers, come in pink, very profuse flowering, and when you get them all to flower at the same time, it's quite impressive color. They'll have reds, pinks, different shades of those, and even yellows now in some of the cultivars to choose from. But what I want you to be observant with is the difference between the Christmas and Thanksgiving cactus, because there really is a difference. This one here, notice that the leaves are rounded. There's not really any sharp points on them, and this particular one is a Christmas cactus. Now, Christmas cactus is really the old standby that people have had in their homes for years and years, and it doesn't bloom as profusely and as it's more sporadic blooming than, say, the Thanksgiving cactus, which if you look at the foliage here, it actually has points or horns on the leaves, and that's how you can tell them apart. This is probably the more popular one that's used these days, and also a little bit better in blooming with a lot of new hybrids. So it's the same genus but different species, and really they'll bloom, you can get them to bloom at the same time, and that bloom is based on the conditions, again, similar to like cyclamens, to kalanchos, to poinsettias, and that has to do with the time of year. And you can see some buds that are naturally starting to show up on here just by being in the greenhouse with the shorter days. Now remember again, they need shorter days starting in early fall, and that means longer nights, anywhere from 15 to 16 hours. So what you may need to do is stick them in a closet to get that long of a night period, or put a paper bag or sack over them, because that will help stimulate a more uniform blooming. Also cut back on the watering, and also give them a little bit cooler conditions like we normally get in the fall, and that helps stimulate bloom for you. Now, depending on when you start, that will determine if it's going to bloom at Thanksgiving or Christmas. Now also, because it's a cactus family or succulent family, you don't want to overwater them. That's a sure way to kill them. But they like more humidity than your traditional succulents. So when you put them indoors, they like a lot of humidity. Watch your watering. They respond to fertilizer pretty good. Be careful though on your conditions as far as the temperature. They don't like real hot temperatures like you would expect a cactus. A little bit more of a cooler, damp condition, because they're actually native to Brazil area, and that's why they have a little bit different succulent type growth pattern. Now also, they're easy to root by breaking these off and sticking them in the soil to take cuttings on them, so that's real encouraging because you can share them with your friends. But they like to be root bound to help trigger that flowering too. And if you should repot one once it gets too root bound, be sure and not use a traditional cactus mix either, because a lot of those have lime in them and they like a little bit more acidic soil. So that's another difference from the traditional succulent that could get you in trouble. So there is a difference between Christmas and Thanksgiving as far as the species and the shape. And you'll also hear people talk about Easter cactus, which we couldn't find one because they're hard to come up with, but a little bit different, more of a triangular shape, and the flower is truly a different shape. It's more of a rounded flower versus oblong like these. Now the next one I want to talk about is chrysanthemums. Now we don't think of using chrysanthemums around Christmas time, usually more Halloween or Thanksgiving, but there's a lot of nice colors that you can use with this time of year too, whites especially. And you can see in the greenhouse behind me there's some deep red ones that are starting to open up. But the mums are your traditional plant. They need pretty indirect light. They also like cooler temperatures. The soil needs to be somewhat moist, but letting it dry out a little bit in between. And then the question that always arises with people, are my florist mums hardy? Can I plant them outside like perennials? Well, one way to really test that is look in the pot and count how many cuttings or plants there are. And if you look in here, there's 5 different plants or cuttings that were stuck in here. That tells you as a general rule, now I wouldn't bank on it 100%, but that tells you that it's not a hardy type. It's strictly a florist one that once it's through blooming, you pitch it and get rid of it. If there's just one plant in there, that tells you it might be hardy that you can put out in the spring and get a little bit of regrowth and bloom on it each year out in your landscape. Probably the best thing though is if you're getting it at a garden center, chances are they can tell you if it's a hardy or perennial type versus a florist, which usually it's not a perennial. So mums are really nice to use at the holidays too, and the color range is quite impressive. Now probably the most traditional of all the holiday plants is a poinsettia. And again, we're in one of the greenhouses that's just loaded with different cultivars of poinsettias through some of the projects with the students here at OSU in Stillwater. Some of them are blooming real nicely, some are just starting to. Remember, just like on the bromeliad, the bloom is really not this red color. This is the leaves or the bract that's turned a red color. The flowers in the center are very small and inconspicuous. And it's easy to let the leaves drop if you have too much of a temperature fluctuation. They like pretty moderate temperatures. The soil should be consistently moist. Don't let it dry out too much in between or they'll drop leaves. Avoid drafts. Don't put them on a TV where you get a lot of heat and fluctuation on temperature. But the poinsettia is very, very traditional. And last year alone, there were over 52 million poinsettia plants sold in the United States. So that tells us there's a lot of interest and a lot of research going on. And John Doe, one of our faculty members who also does research in poinsettias and cut flowers, is going to explain more about some of these new cultivars and practices coming out.
Some of the other work that we're doing here at the university is to take a look at how to grow poinsettias with lower water and fertilizer use. What we're trying to grow is a more environmentally friendly poinsettias. Greenhouse crops do help the environment. Plants having in the home, they help freshen the air. We want to make sure that when we're growing them, we're also helping in the environment as well. There's been a lot of misconceptions about poinsettias, and the misconception is that they are poisonous, and they are not. They don't taste good by all accounts. Of course, I haven't tried them myself, but they are certainly not poisonous. They are safe to be used in the home, and there's no problem with them. One of the other studies that we have going at the university here is to try new poinsettia cultivars. Within the last few years, there's been a number of new poinsettia cultivars on the market, and some of these the homeowner might want to be aware of. One of the more recent developments has been a very dark green leaf and a very dark red bracts, making a very attractive plant. And if I could compare that with some of the older plants, we can see just how dark green the leaves of the new cultivars are. Also, you'll notice that this one is fully colored up in red and just covered with bright red bracts. Whereas this plant, which is an older cultivar, is still just starting to flower. And that's also one of the new developments, has been earlier flowering poinsettias. A lot of people are buying their poinsettias now in the end of November, beginning of December, instead of in late December like we used to. Another new cultivar along this line is called Jolly Red, and it has the same dark red, strong red bracts and dark green leaves, but it is a little bit later than the first cultivar I showed, which is Freedom. Okay, so we have Freedom and Jolly Red, two cultivars you might want to look for in the stores.
Well, even though the poinsettia is a so-called traditional plant, each year it seems like more and more varieties and other alternatives are coming out with this one, which makes it anything but boring for the holiday season. And just like the poinsettias or any of the plants that we've highlighted for gift ideas, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you protect them when you're taking them from the garden center of the store to your car with the colder temperatures outside. Again, you might want to drop them in a plant sleeve if they're available. That helps protect the foliage and keeps you from banging them up, or just use a paper sack where you can put the plant in or cover it on the top too. And also try not to keep them in the car too long. Watch your watering, and when you're purchasing your plants, look for the vibrant, healthy-looking plants, look for insect disease problems, and make sure that they're about to reach their peak. It's better to get them early versus late because they'll last and you can enjoy them a lot longer. Now, if you want just some general information about houseplant care, you can get that at your county extension office, fact sheet 6411 on houseplant care, or one magazine that's been out about a year that's very interesting that's available at your bookstores is called Houseplant Magazine. It has a lot of pictures, new information on cultivars, how to care for these types of foliage and flowering plants. It in itself might be a nice gift idea. So I think if you'll check around, there's all kinds of options for plants for gifts, all kinds of information to support it. So be sure to include a houseplant on your wish list, or at least a gift for some of your gardening friends.